Thanks for coming. I know sometimes it's hard to get out at lunch to make a meeting, but we really appreciate the fact that you all came today. And it's heartening to see this many people in the room when you could be off sitting by the river eating a really delicious sandwich or something. So this discussion today is brought to you by Partners for Reintegration. We're a fairly new group that is working on the very, very difficult issue of prisoners making the transition from being locked up to getting back in the communities and getting their lives straightened out. We have a really interesting panel today. We have Vicki Amundsen from Clark Fork Realty. We have Levi Daniels, who is a returning citizen. Robert Howe, who is working with housing. Landy Holloway, who is with the Department of Corrections. And I am Michael Moore. I am in charge of Missoula's 10-year plan to end homelessness. And please don't laugh too hard at that. Yeah, we get it. We're not going to end homelessness, but we're going to do it one person at a time, one family at a time. So I'm going to turn it over to Landy to talk a little bit about the problem that we face here as a community. Thanks again for coming.
First of all, there's somebody in the room that I want to recognize, and they're going to have to leave. Is Emily Bentley with the City Council. She has made it possible for us to have meetings at the City Council chambers, and unfortunately, some of you may have just learned that we were not able to meet over there today and come here. But Emily supports our efforts, and I want to thank you for making that possible and for being here today, Emily.
I'm happy to leave you.
So again, apologize for the last minute change of location. You made it across the street. That's wonderful. Partners for Reintegration is a reentry coalition that is a group of service agencies, Department of Corrections, returning citizens, business owners, service providers who are really focusing on reducing the barriers for returning citizens so that they can be successful in the community. There is a flyer here that talks about Partners for Reintegration. There is a website. Please pick up a flyer. It'll tell you a little bit more information about that. Really, we see our role as advocacy and education for those issues that create obstacles for those who are returning to the community, and reducing that stigma and changing the perception of what that may look like for someone. There is a sign-up list going around that if you would like to add your name to the email list, we're going to start doing more public discussions and forums and doing and allowing people to be informed on cutting-edge information or things that are in the paper about returning citizens. You may have noticed there was a letter to the editor this week in the paper written by Michael Moore, and then Janice Staten, who is over there in the doorway. She is the co-chair for Partners for Reintegration. If she gets your email, you're going to know what's going on, and that's a great thing. So that was I think, a great introduction to this topic about there are barriers and what do we do. Who are our neighbors? What do we have here? The Department of Corrections has a statewide reentry task force. We're focusing on reentry efforts. It is not only a state issue, but it's a national issue with reentry. There's lots of information about mass incarceration. What do we do? I think we're all getting tired of flipping the bill to put people in custody, in jail, whether it be in jail. We have a huge jail diversion project going on here in Missoula. But across the state, we're taking a look at why are we putting people in prison? How long do they stay there? What is really a barrier? And how do we best meet that individual for where they are and help them achieve success in the community? Are we going to help everybody? No. Are we looking for handouts and to give people something? No. It's a matter of finding that individual and giving them a helping hand of how that person can reintegrate back into the community. Today you're going to hear Levi's story, you're going to hear about what it takes for property management, and you're going to hear about some transitional housing. In Missoula, we have about 1,300 people on probation and parole, supervised by the state. There are about 110 people who are housed over at the Missoula Pre-Release Center. All those people need homes. All those people need housing. Sustainable, safe housing and affordable housing is a huge key to reducing recidivism. We all know rent is very expensive here, and we know that it's difficult if you are making a good wage of how hard that is to have a place to live. What about when you come out of prison, or maybe if you are working on changing your life and trying to move forward, those barriers that are there and how do you overcome them? And so those conversations are going to come up here. So this really is a forum to start those discussions. There are several people in the room that are from the correctional system. There are people who work in the correctional system, who are part of the correctional system. There are service providers in this room. There's a great group of people to continue this conversation and take it back to your agencies and see what more you can do. What more can we do as a community? Because quite frankly, it's not the Department of Corrections' responsibility to take care of everybody when they come back to the community. 97% of people return to the community. So what happens then? If we don't reduce barriers and present possibilities for people to succeed, I think we're defeating our purpose, and it's a rotating cycle. It's a continuum that will happen. Some things that you're going to hear about property management. I know that in our experience, oftentimes a person has difficulty getting into a property management. I would encourage you as a landlord or as a property manager or a real estate person to ask questions. Ask questions. Would you sign a release of information? You have a probation officer that comes attached to anybody who's on supervision. That's a pretty good, reliable source of information. If an individual is talking to you pretty directly about their experiences, ask questions. What are your support systems? How long have you been employed? Don't just disregard an individual because they have a felony conviction, because we're not really do justice, I think, as a society to just shun that individual and put them aside. So again, asking questions, there's a lot of public information that is out there. Call your probation officer. Believe it or not, probation officers are a great support for people and a great line of information. I think I probably covered about what I can talk about. I am happy to field questions or answer anything. My business card is over there. Please feel free to follow up with me if I can be of any help. But I think I'll turn it back over to Michael to talk about what's going on in Missoula.
There's one more thing you should say, and that's about how many people come back to Missoula each year.
Oh, so there are about 112 people who leave Montana State Prison and come back to Missoula, and not all of them meet in a year. There's about 2,400 people who go into prison and come out. It's about 112 is the 3-year average that come to Missoula looking to reintegrate into our community straight out of prison. Now, there's more that are coming out of the county jails in a different way, but those are directly out of prison.
So when we, as a community, started to work on our 10-year plan in 2010, we did a study that sort of dissected the entire homeless population. There's a stereotype that the homeless community is the guy that we see downtown, wrapped in a couple of coats, carrying all this stuff in a trash bag. That population is about 10% of the people who are actually homeless in Missoula. Over 50% of homeless people have jobs. Over 50% of homeless people have children, girlfriends, boyfriends. The picture, the stereotype, the stigma of the homeless guy on the street, it's true, but it's true in a very, very narrow sort of way. So as we started working on the plan, we realized that, we have to try to serve all people who are homeless. And, believe me, that's as big a job as it sounds like, and is destined to have a lot of frustration. But one of the things that we put directly in the plan that was most concerning to us was, at the time, not much of an ability to work with the Department of Corrections with people who are getting out. We often encounter, and Travis from the Poverello is here today and could attest to this, people showing up at the pub at 11 o'clock at night and say, hey, I just got out of prison and this is where I'm living, with the pub having no idea that they were about to show up. That's hard on them, and it's really hard on the service provider community to deal with that kind of just appearance, because you don't know the background of that person, and should you let him in, could you let him in? So we said, as part of the 10-year plan, we've got to find a way to start working better with DOC. We did start making some inroads there, and magically then DOC kind of turned a leaf over and really got interested in why people were coming back to them so often. And one of the reasons is that there was no place for them here that ensured that they would have that kind of stability. Housing for everybody who's been homeless is that it is the number one thing that creates stability in your life, even more so than a job. Obviously, you got to have a job at some point to get housing, but we do have programs that can help people get into housing relatively quickly. Without that housing, you know, the guy who's on the street and suffers from addiction, he's going to be back. Without that housing, the prisoner that shows up in Missoula, probably going back. The person who's lost their one rental, they're probably going back. So for us, housing is kind of a crux issue. And it goes beyond just the prisoner, the person who's returning. Oftentimes that prisoner is returning to a family that's already here in the community. And when that person is reintroduced back into that family life, sometimes you'll have trouble on the, you know, particularly if you're in a rental, you may have a hard time with that person staying in the house, and then the entire family is out on the streets. So the fact that we get one person who might be temporarily homeless is often multiplied by 3 and 4 times. In this community, on any given day, we have between 50 and 100 children in our school district who do not have a house. And that number is exacerbated by people who are returning, and then because of their situation, their family loses housing. It's a very, very difficult thing. On the flip side, if you're a landlord and a property manager who's working for a lot of people that own homes and or apartments, you know, you face it's a difficult quandary. And we're not gonna, you know, we're not here to fire some silver bullet that's gonna make it easier and easier. There are some people who are really, really hard to house. And there are some people who probably deserve to be told, sorry, but you don't fit our criteria. But Landy's point is a good point, and it's to go ahead and ask those questions, because we do have programs that people are into. Most people are in some sort of aftercare type program, probation and parole. They're being tended to. And in fact, in some ways, they're being tended to a lot more than the clients that we might be sending to you who've been maybe chronically homeless on the streets. I would often say that's, if you were a wagering person, you might have a better chance wagering right there. The downside to the community, obviously there's a downside to the returning citizen. The downside to the community of not housing people, aside from the fact that they often go back to prison, and prison is an expensive way to house people, is that leaving people on the street in Missoula is the very worst thing that we can do as a community. We can house almost anybody in this community for about $8,000 a year and provide them some sort of supportive services. If we don't house them, the average cost across the country and in Missoula of somebody being homeless on the streets is $25,000 to $50,000 a year. Right now, we have 6 guys downtown who have $100,000 bills at St. Patrick Hospital. I don't know whether any of those people were returning citizens or not, but when you leave people to fend for themselves on the street, what happens to them is they go to the jail and they go to the hospital. And those are really high-end financial instruments with which to deal with homeless people. So I'm going to hand it off now, I think, to Vicki. Vicki is a property manager at Clark Fork Real Estate. Clark Fork Real Estate, I'm just going to give them a little bit of props here, has been one company that has an open mind about people who are returning. There's other companies around town. Missoula Property Management has also been very, very good to deal with. But I think she can describe kind of the sticky wicket that you might find yourself in at times, but also the worthwhile aspect of maybe taking a chance on somebody. So thanks, Vicki.
Well, so far we've been quite lucky. We've not really had any issues, and we've been renting for several years. I own a property that has 30 units in it, and I have, I think, 11 felons. And I can tell you that I have had far more difficulty over the years in renting to college students than I ever have. That's serious. Um, And so we find that so many of these people are really trying to make it. And I think there's 12 folks over there right now. It's like a community. And I really would not hesitate in most situations because these people are trying to work their program. The only difficulties that I have run into in recent years with some of these folks is some of the guys get out and they've been incarcerated for many, many years, and they want to form a relationship, and they get involved with some kind of extreme female partners that sort of pull them off center for a while. And that's the only problems that I've ever had. So that's why I think that probably it's a good.
Do you take housing vouchers?
Housing vouchers. We take some housing programs, yeah.
Vicki, could you talk a little bit just about whether there are liability concerns or not when dealing with that population, and whether, because property managers often represent a lot of different people,
Right.
how that factors?
Well, I think that's one reason that I kind of put them into apartments that I own, is because I don't want some property owner coming along and saying, didn't you know this guy was going to make meth in your house, So that's kind of my concern, and why I have pretty much limited renting to properties that I own or my family owns. So.
Yes.
What about when people are registered as violent offenders or sexual offenders?
Yes, I do have some registered violent offenders, and I have a situation. A lot of people probably know this gentleman. He is a contractor now in Missoula. He has hired several folks that are on the pre-release program and so forth. And his daughter joined the Y, and he wanted to go into the Y and work out and become a member, and he can't because he's a violent offender. He's a violent offender because he had a meth lab several years ago. And this is a person who's a very productive person in the community, and also is creating opportunities for other folks that are trying to get back, into the system, into society. And so those scarlet letters that we put on these people really are a damaging thing to them and their families when we do this on a permanent thing, when he's really not a violent person. Never was violent, but we classify some of those things as violent offenses.
What about sex offenders?
I would say that when I graduated from high school back in 1963, that probably half of the graduating male members of that class were felons, according to our definition today.
I think we know what you're saying. We can talk about that later.
I try to talk nicely.
Right. I think that's well done.
But if we refer somebody that's a registered sex offender, is that someone you would still consider it's not an absolute line in the sand?
The sex offenders that I have real issues with are child molesters, that kind of situation. That's just not acceptable.
I think one of the things, because I had a lot of people come directly to my office to try to help them find housing. That's not really my job, but when somebody's standing in front of you, you give it a go anyway. And the reservation that people have is the circumstances of the event. If it's a stat rape case, something like that, that's not going to be an issue. If it's a stranger issue, that's going to be an issue every time. And so far, I'm O for however many stranger sex assaulters that I've dealt with.
The thing that we often run into is just the fact that they have to register, and then someone can look up on a website.
Right.
They're at this location that poses a stigma of the whole entire thing.
Right,
So
it
most
does.
Property management places are not willing to be under that umbrella.
Right.
So-
And I think that illustrates Landy's point, is to if you have the time and the willingness to think, just take that next step and really look at the circumstances of what the event was. Yes, ma'am.
If I may, in regards to sex offenders, I would encourage property rental companies, if you're concerned, to also ask them to sign a release of information with their provider. And that's an option you have. And being a provider, I am more than willing to talk to folks about persons of concern because stranger attacks are extremely rare. And actually people who have pedophilic urges are also rare. And so I think there's a lot of education and misgivings that needs to be clarified in regards to that particular population. And by all means, be my card, call me, sign a release. I know so many guys, it's a huge issue. I think I'd be more than happy to sign a release if you can talk to me or my facilitator and help clear up the concerns.
Thank you for that. All right, we're going to turn the next section over to Levi so that we don't bust the clock here too much as we go along today.
I think the biggest thing I'm going to start with is that the thing everybody keeps talking about is what's going to make you successful in return to society. And Lanny was a big person pointing out things to me that you need to have support, you need to have a good stable job, good stable housing. When I returned to society, I had two of those things. I didn't have housing. I had a great family, and I was very lucky to get jobs right away, even though considering I'm a 3-time convicted violent offender. So a lot of people like, McDonald's, whatever, they're not going to hire me. But I got a lot of opportunities from people that were open-minded and allowed me to work for them. And I struggled with housing. I ended up living in a motel for 3 months, almost 3.5 months straight, paying for a motel room, which is very expensive. And then I got the opportunity to live with a friend, and I lived with him for 7 months. But living with a friend doesn't necessarily mean he was also a convicted felon. And that also put me in a situation at times. That environment, but I had really no choice. I tried every day for almost 11 months, multiple times a day contacting property managers. Got to the point where I could look at Craigslist, the newspaper, or any other form of advertisement for rentals and stuff like that, that I was starting to recognize the property management numbers by heart. Because I did it daily. I seriously, every day, I was on it every day, because I don't want to return to prison. I spent half my life in prison, literally half my life. Went to prison when I was 15 years old, and I returned when I was 32. I've been out just about 1.5 years now. And those are my choices. Those are nobody else's fault, anything else. I'm accountable to my actions and my responsibilities. But I had to struggle with a lot of that. And I don't necessarily, I was talking to Vicky, I don't think it's necessarily an all-around bias against convicted felons or registered felons or anything like that. I think that some of it's policies and they're trying to protect, property. It's a business aspect, and I get that, I understand that. But at the same time, you're not necessarily protecting society because somebody doesn't have a place to live. They don't have, in some places you can't have a job if you don't have a place to live. When you fill out an application, they want you to have a place to live. So you struggle with all those things. And then after 11 months, I ended up getting lucky and then finding a landlord who would rent to me. He didn't care about felony convictions. He didn't care about any of that stuff. And I've maintained good housing with him since then. I've continued to maintain good employment. So, like I said, the biggest struggles was just trying to get people to even talk to me. Once I even mentioned the word felon or mentioned that some would go past felon, they were like, okay, well, what's your felon? Mine are bad. I have a convicted murder and I have 2 violent assaults with weapons. And I mean, again, that's nobody else's fault, that's my own. But they wouldn't talk to me about it. If you actually look at the details of all my stuff, I was a kid. I made bad mistakes when I was a child, and I'm trying to move past that and get past all that stuff. And as soon as I mentioned that, no, some would go a little bit farther, and some didn't really care, some cared. But again, you gotta understand it's policies and it's just business. It's not so much a personal effect on people for who I am and what I did and my labels. They're just trying to protect their businesses and stuff like that. My only suggestion beyond that would be to maybe try to open it and go into these details. And Landy's always been there. If I have any employers, anybody else, they can ask her questions. Granted, she can't sit here and say I'm the greatest person in the world because she doesn't know me on that much of a personal level. But she can say I've done this, I've done that, and I've done this since I've been out. And at least give people an idea of what I'm trying to do with my life versus just saying, hey, yeah, he's a convicted violent offender and he has to register for the rest of his life. Again, those are my choices.
Something else you did come out with too that I think is often is looked at too quickly is that you came out with no rental history.
No.
When you went to prison at 15, why would you have a rental history?
No credit history.
And no
job
credit history. And so sometimes those are issues that you can work around that don't, I mean, a person doesn't come out with a perfect rental history, perfect credit history, or a whole bunch of money in their pocket. But they may have that cognitive change or that belief where they are being determined, they're engaged in their community, and they have a support system. And so those are some things that I think that prevailed for Levi. But I remember him saying, what am I doing wrong? I mean, he was actually asking, how do I communicate with these people? How do I talk to a property manager? Well, you don't tell them everything at once. You ease into it, try and sell them on the positive things, and actually go face to face. Don't call over the phone, because as we all know, it's real easy to say, no, thanks. You never have to see him, you never have to look anybody in the eye. But I think in Levi's case, it was interesting to watch the process for Levi. Granted, he came in needing to register as a violent offender, but even though that was there, he was very pragmatic about, this is what happened, this is where I am. But yet it took a long time.
Yeah.
And you were employed, and there was steady employment there.
Yes, they still work the same companies almost the whole time ago.
If I have a question for you, so I do outreach with the Poverty Center, and I work a lot with people that are staying in the motels. What was the motel experience like for you? Did you see police called in on people in other rooms? Did you see like some of the sometimes drug activity that goes on? And was that something that could compromise probation violation for yourself? For example, if like law enforcement's responding to the room next door, they have to talk to you, who may be witness for something. Is that something that has potential putting your probation at risk?
Oh yeah, for definitely. And then when I first got out, actually the job I worked at the motel that I ended up living at for the majority of that time, and I see it all the time. And yeah, it does. It puts you at risk daily. And it's not just so much the motels, but it's any kind of environment you place yourself in, it can become a risk. And like I said, when I lived with my friend, for the most part, he was a really great guy. And, some of his associates weren't so. They would bring things to our home that he would try to be like, okay, but it would still put me at risk. And there's people that are higher at risk to addiction, returning to addiction and stuff like that, that they could easily fail in those opportunities. Every day is a struggle being who I am. My biggest addiction has been violence my whole life. I've been involved in violence my whole life. The whole time I was in prison involved in violence. And it took a lot, even when I'm returning, to get past that on a cognitive level. And I still struggle, don't get me wrong. I'll probably always struggle for the rest of my life. It's something I've known all the way into my 30s. So yeah, it is like that. And then, so the environment, your housing environment does matter. If you go live in a neighborhood that has constant drugs and police and stuff like that, yeah, it becomes an issue. So, and some of the better places to live are the property managements, and they're some of the nicer places. Because I had a couple places that I could have possibly rented, but there were literally holes in the ground. Literally. I'm not even exaggerating. And they're way overpriced, and they're just people, because they know the fact that I was a violent offender. I couldn't find anywhere else to live. One lady actually, I applied for this place, and it was for like $450 a month, single room, like studio apartment. And then when she found out I was a convicted violent offender, she bumped it up to $675 because she knew I was struggling. And I disclosed that though. I was like, yeah, I'm having a real hard time trying to find a place to live. And I disclosed that, and I was still struggling with trying to learn how to communicate with these people and not seem deceptive, because I don't want to be deceptive. I want to embrace who I am. Like I said, I made mistakes. I am who I am. I'm trying to move past that. But I would try to convey that to them, that yeah, I know what I did, I know what everything else, and here I am struggling, I'm just asking for help, and sometimes it was too much information, and they try to take advantage of that, Yeah.
So we struggle with a lot of times when we're trying to house homeless individuals. You have to submit the application fees, and sometimes they're pretty high, and you're never going to see them again, and they're going to tell the person no, and it's just wasted money. So, and then sometimes double deposits.
Oh, yeah.
Get you in there, but we're going to take a double deposit on you and stuff like this. So what resources do you, as someone coming out of prison now, to help you with application fees when you don't have a job, or you don't have an income? Who helps you with that, or do you just not apply to those places?
I did the same thing for a while, because I got married while I was in prison, so I was trying to live with my wife, And I did the same thing, $40, some of them $40, so we're paying $80 for an application because they had to pay for both of us. And I was lucky. I had a job. I got a lot of things, got a lot of help and stuff from my family. But there are other ways to get help. I know there's this program, the PFR is trying to help a lot of people, and you have other types of things going on. You can also talk to your landlords and not your landlord, but your probation officers and stuff like that, and try to get them to ask them about suggestions of places they may know that aren't going to ask you for an application, and already you might have a heads up that they do rent to convicted felons. Me, I got to the point where I just avoided property management completely. And I'm not saying all of them are bad. I really don't mean that. Clarksburg was one of the places that it was a nice place. They were like, hey, me and my wife, she didn't have a job at the time, and that ended up throwing it out for us. So it wasn't based upon my convictions or anything like that. And so there are some places that aren't so bad, but I just avoided them. I got to the point where the place I relied most upon was the Missoula newspaper. Because personal homeowners tend to advertise through the classifieds and the Missoulian, whereas Craigslist loaded with property management, and then you see the signs, a lot of them. Those are the two things I think are the best keys. Look for places that say have the for rent sign, and usually say by owner, or look from the newspaper, and you'll see a personal number. Those are probably your best bet. But as far as now, like I said, people are trying to change and trying to get people to open their mind and be a little bit more open-minded to the fact that review it a case-by-case basis versus just here in felon, register, and done.
All right, let's hand it off here to Robert, who's going to talk about a different program that's going on here. But I have to say quickly, just as a former newspaper person, it is so heartening to hear that there is one still remaining positive use for the news. Robert.
I'm Robert Howland with Good Neighbors Missoula, and we are a private housing organization. And so a little bit about this. So myself and my partner, we are both of the returning citizen population. And so we both have had our experiences with finding housing and employment. What we did is we got tired of seeing a lot of these same things happen to everyone else. So we got together and we started looking around. We did the research and we pulled our pennies together and we started this organization because we figured we could do some good. And so what we did is we created an organization that has three focuses: employment, housing, and access to mental health services. And so currently we have one house where we're able to house 5 individuals. We've currently, since we've started in September, we've housed 7 individuals. 2 have moved on to bigger and better housing opportunities, while we still have 5 currently residing with us. This summer we were able to form a small contract company, and we were able to do some small construction projects, a lot of lawn removal or lawn maintenance, just general labor work. And so what we do is we take these things that we hear about, like we don't ask for an application fee, we don't do a credit check. When we ask for references, we ask for who do you know in the community that can talk about you right now, whether that's a probation officer, whether that's a case manager, whether it's a friend, someone that knows about what you're doing now, because we don't care about what you've done in the past, because we've all been to that rodeo and basically it doesn't matter, because we believe in starting at a fresh change. And so we're trying to create an environment, a safe, sober environment where a person can come and reestablish their lives and reestablish a reference, maybe get a little job, maybe move on, maybe go to school. And so as individuals that come to our housing, we also provide case management for them, whether they need help moving on to a new place, whether they need help finding work, finding anything we can do to help, we're here for. And so kind of all the things that you hear about from the previous speakers, we've taken a lot of those issues and we're trying to do something about it. And so if anybody wants to talk about that, I'd be happy to sit down and chat with whoever and see what we can do to help out. Thanks.
So what Robert's talking about there is kind of a model that's been pioneered a little bit in a couple of other communities around the state, but it is either buying or renting a home and then setting it up to rent out to people who are returning citizens. It has been a financial winner for a number of people that have done it. We're not saying Robert's Robert's not winning yet,
We do that bono.
but there's a financial aspect to this thing that can make it work and make it profitable. And we are, at least at my job, we're actively trying to find other people that might be willing to have a house used in that sort of way, because there's a background of, a house with a $1,200 a month monthly nut, but $1,800 a month in rent. So obviously you're going to have some cost associated with that population, but it could be a financial win. Yes, what's your question?
If you were to rent out a house and do something like that, are they able to rent it out to violent or sexual offenders?
So with the gentleman we're currently working with, because this is such a new thing, and like I said, we started really in September with the housing. He wants to keep it very low profile, and I understand that, because if this thing flops, he doesn't want his name dragged through the mud. So right now we are unable to accept any high profile cases, but we're currently in negotiations with another property that we would be able to take SVO offenders. And so right now with this current property, we're not, but we're looking at expanding to create a place, because we understand the need for individuals with SVO offenses.
I want to add something to that real quick. I mean, one of the things that I'm a huge advocate is that we take a look at the individual. We meet them where they are, and then we help them along the way. One thing that understanding and realizing that the percentage of sex offenders and violent offenders are fairly small on the caseload is really important. And I know, thank you, Brenda, for your comments earlier about sex offenses and those questions. I feel that, for me, there's a lot of work to be done just on the general conversation about being able to be willing to rent to a felon, and then you can go a little bit deeper. Because sometimes what happens, as soon as somebody says felon and then sex offender in the next 5 minutes, the conversation's over. And we haven't really gotten to that person, I got a guy who owns a house, or I got a property management, or somebody's in my church, or somebody's in my service organization, and just getting to them and saying, hey, would you consider taking a chance on one felon? You don't have to say, will you take a chance on a violent offender or a sex offender, but will you start somewhere? And so then with that, then you develop more successes, and then you'll have something to fall back onto. And I think sex offender housing is one of the greatest needs out there, but we do have to start somewhere so that we start developing that social capital and those good reports that happen. So.
You had a question back there?
Yes, ma'am. My name's Howard Reason. I recently just got out as well, and I would be homeless if it wasn't for Vicky. But I have a wife and a 9-month-old daughter, and we can't find anywhere else to live but those properties that Vicky has, and we need a bigger place. But I keep hearing this come up: violent or sexual offender. Well, I've probably spent $400 filling out these application fees, and I've been looking for 9 months. And no one will take me, and that's because I have a manufacturing charge. It was for marijuana, but it doesn't say that in the charge. And no one is sued. That I will do all these applications and go through the whole process, and they're like, yeah, no, we take felons, and then they're like, call me in a week, and I'll call them back. Nope, not at all. It's just it's like beating your head against the wall, really.
I would add to that as well. Thank you for that comment. That there's an obligation, I think, as community members, we have to interrupt that cycle, because there are family members, there's children, people involved in relationships that if we shut the door, we're not impacting just one individual. It could be a whole family. It could be those people's children, and again and again. So somewhere we have to step up and interrupt that cycle.
I want to mention maybe an anecdotal story really quickly that kind of shows some of the logistics that property management companies face. And it's not like the big kind of trash unit. There was a particular situation where it's pretty subpar housing, but the person that was staying there violated his probation and went back to jail and had to sort of remain in the Sentencing County Detention Facility. The mom was trying to get the personal belongings out of the unit, and the mom was hard for the property management company to work with. They couldn't touch the personal belongings because they're not legally able to do that. It became such a headache for them. They chose just to go to eviction instead of working with people that could help support him. This person stayed in jail longer because he didn't have housing to come back to. And so I started asking some questions like, what if there was a release of information that you were talking to the probation officer? What if there was a support person already in place that if things went bad, you could remove the belongings and so the property management company didn't have to deal with it? And the property manager said, that's great, I never thought about it like that. I was pretty encouraged, but then talking to the owner's like, I'm not gonna take a chance like that. And so those bad experiences, even if it's just frustration and sort of logistics and how do you transition someone out if it doesn't work so you can get someone back in, when you don't have that community support, those bad experiences are what people think of. And so when you see that person in front of you, you're not seeing the person in front of you, you're seeing all those bad experiences in the past and thinking, why the hell am I going to take another chance when I've been burned so many times in the past? And so the folks coming out have all of this backlog of bad experiences people have already had, sort of, coloring what people are perceiving of this person that's trying to make a second start.
I think that's it too. I think it's a great point. Recidivism is pretty high in the state. And I think that if you think about it, kind of becomes a chicken or egg thing. What came first? I think you keep coming back around to that unless somebody starts making a change, we as a community start making a change. And I think that's what's trying to go happen here is make that change because yeah, you're right. The reality is a lot of people are going to re-offend or violate and return, and go back to prison. But a lot of that's because of housing, not all of it. I'm not going to sit here and blame anything on housing or any of the problems and stuff like that. People make bad choices. We drive our own bus, right? And so
the city's responsible for street maintenance.
Right. Right. But I think that's it. It kind of goes back around. But at some point, you can't continue to sit here and say, well, one person messed up, so I'm going to completely eliminate the opportunity for other people. Because there are people I got some opportunities, and I'm utilizing them. I'm trying to be a success. I have a lot of paper in front of me, and I don't plan to ever want to see inside of a jail cell again. Even if it's county jail, I don't. I really don't. I have no intentions to. To me, it's not an option in my mind. So I want to be one of the success stories. But then, granted, it's not going to happen with everybody. But more people give opportunities, I think the more chances you're going to see as success stories.
Montana's recidivism rate is 37.1%, and so if you look at that, that's when you leave prison, how many people will return to prison. So that's about 4 out of 10. And if how many of those, if they had more opportunities in the community, wouldn't go back? Because quite frankly, we're talking about a $35 application fee. What's it cost? A year of incarceration in the men's prison is about $33,000. And so take that comparison in helping somebody in the beginning. We talked a little bit about motels, but we've seen people come out of prison, or not even out of prison, or maybe people who have had to try and change things, they end up in a hotel. But what does it cost to stay in a hotel for a month? About $800 to $1,000. And how do you save money? And how do you eat healthy and get a deposit to move into somewhere else? And so sometimes it's already hard, and a lot of people will just give up or return back to using or other violations. Yeah.
Landy, I know that DOC is very interested in the whole reentry project all over the state. Are they putting some money where their mouth is in terms of helping things like housing?
Well, Liz, thank you.
That's what they paid me for.
So, yeah, there's a theory. I was at a conference last week presenting, and someone came up to me and says, oh, DOC's doing more than just handing you $5 and pushing you out the door in the prison. And my response wanted to be, oh, you as the community, are you ready to step up? And that didn't come quite out that way. But I did want to say, how much is the community's responsibility versus the Department of Corrections' responsibility? If somebody leaves the prison and discharges their sentence, they're not even underneath the supervision of the Department of Corrections. We don't have anything to do with that individual. But to get more back to your question about what are we doing with money, there are some monies that are available that we have been able to use to help people transition back into the community. Is that enough money? No. So the legislature is starting to take a look at that. Reports are going to Law and Justice Interim Committee talking about housing as a #1 priority. But really, is DOC developing community housing? I don't think so. I think it's more about the community collaborating of how that works. If there is money to help people transition in the beginning, we also need the wraparound services. We also need to make sure that there are jobs in place. And so it is a very convoluted effort. There was a legislative change that now allowed, I'm going to probably get this wrong, more money to come back into a person's savings account while they're in prison that then can be distributed to a provider on the outside. So, There's a lady right there that has a question. Go.
I wondered if there's anything that can be done at all about the federal housing issue, because right at the moment, if you're in any kind of subsidized housing, federally subsidized housing, they will rent to felons, and I think that's a pretty important issue, because it's like the biggest access that we have in Missoula to affordable housing, and I mean, is there anything that we on the state level can do to make an impact in this horrible situation?
Yes, you can put a little bit of pressure on your housing authority, and I'm sorry, is anybody here from the housing authority? I've had a little bit of this conversation. There's somebody from the labor and board industry on our statewide reentry task force, that the federal mandate out of Washington, D.C. says that there's only restrictions for if you have manufactured methamphetamine on public housing, or if you are a lifetime registered sex offender.
Well, that's not what they tell you.
Right, because local states and local jurisdictions are allowed to increase those, or put additional limitations on it. And I think what's happening with our economy and what we're building is that if we continue to put a little pressure on them, whether that be through the legislative session or through your local politics, I think that can help. That can start that conversation. We've started it within the Department of Corrections, but I want to tell you that as community members, that is where the force comes from, talking to your legislators or talking to your city council people. So thank you.
Can I add, from talking to Billings, the Montana Women's Prison had a second chance grant for 5 years, so they got their coalition started, and it still continues. And they found that what they had to do was start appealing the rejections from the local housing agency, and they did that faithfully. They put somebody on it, they appealed every rejection for 5 years. Now the Billings agency is so tired of having to have appeal hearings, they have set aside 10 units for people getting out of women's prison for people to have housing. So what we need to do as a community is, when you need to apply, you need to get rejected, and you need to appeal. And that could be a nice community effort to appeal for people who should get into subsidized housing. But it's going to take that kind of community effort. If Billings' experience is accurate, it could work here, because it's the local agency that has the restriction.
And that doesn't only fall on the housing authority.
Yeah.
That falls on us as community members to know that those procedures are in place and to help people advocate for themselves. Because I'll say that the housing authority is at the at-risk housing council, and they're part of these conversations. So by no means I decided I better clarify that we're not talking bad about the housing authority.
Another thing I think that can be helpful is peer support. We've seen to be pretty successful. If you can talk to someone that's already gone through some of these challenges, that can be a contact you get when you get out. I know there's some constraints in allowing a peer to come into the detention facility, for example. I don't know what DOC is like with people that have felony backgrounds that are being successful coming into the Deer Lodge and talking to people. But that's something that I think has been helpful. I know the detention center is looking at being able to be more flexible with meeting people before they get discharged, so you can start forming some of those positive relationships, so you have a little bit more social capital built up when you get out. So not just the hard currency, but some positive relationships, so you're not just reconnecting to the bad element. So does DOC let folks come in terms of peer support, work with folks?
Jim, would you like to answer that?
Actually, I can address that. That's part of my job. We are starting a process and actually changing Department of Corrections policies and procedures to allow both returning citizens who are successful. We've actually had a couple of guys that have come in and taught some classes, and we're also bringing in other community members who are providing different services, from transitional housing, therapies, tattoo removal. We're doing all kinds of things in that realm. So, and I kind of frame it this way. Prisons have always been really good at keeping certain citizens in and certain citizens out. And we're trying to keep those certain citizens in while we let others come in and go back out. So it takes a good bit of work to change hundreds of years of practice. So it's not an overnight thing, but we're in a new day in Montana Department of Corrections, and things are getting better in that sense.
If I might add to that too, part of our reentry effort with the Department of Corrections is looking at the entire system. It's not just housing. And prison inmates is huge. And as Jim stated, we are changing that, but we're also trying to service providers, anyone we can, to have this person have a leg up when we go out the door. So you're seeing a lot of changes internally. We have a group that meets quarterly with the department that all we look at is where are the system problems, the barriers, and how can we change them to make it more receptive. So when these folks do come out, they come out in a better fashion. So there's a lot of work to be done, but we're tackling it to make sure we tackle it.
Great. I know we're getting on toward 1 o'clock, and we don't want to keep people, if you didn't get your lunch or you need to get back to your office, folks are willing to stick around and answer some more questions if you have questions you'd like to ask personally. We really appreciate your interest and your willingness to come out and join us today. This is a tough, tough problem. As these guys just said, there are some good things happening both on the DOC side of things and here in the community. I think the one thing I'm taking away from this today is it's an institutional problem, and we can talk about it as an institutional problem till our faces turn blue. But what it comes down to a lot of times is one person. And what we've seen here today is the power of one person willing to rent, one person willing to do better than he did in the past, one guy who did poorly in the past and is now doing super great now and is offering the opportunity for other people to improve. So whatever your job is, you've got a chance to make a difference in it. And if our population transects with yours, you've got the power to make a change. So we appreciate you coming. It's really, really important for the community and for folks returning to the community. And thanks for coming. If you have questions, ask them.
Can I just encourage, this is a solutions-based meeting here. If you are a property management individual or private or whatever, and you have the opportunity to have someone fill out an application, if you at all have that power to maybe waive that application fee or even return it if they're not getting the property, that little things like that really do matter. And especially with someone with no income or very little income, it can make a big difference. That's just a little thing you could do.
Right. And this is Heather from Western Montana Mental Health. She's out on the street working with people day after day on the street trying to get them inside. And that's a great job. Yep.